just curious if anyone on the panel has an opinion about what is possibly going on in Syria. I heard that there was supposed to be leads from today. We've been glued to Al Jazeera on our internet, and all we could see was Egypt. There wasn't any comment made about Syria. I was curious whether you think anything is going to happen.
Well, okay, that's my country of choice. Is the thing on? Yeah. We've been watching Syria, and basically, as far as we can tell, what's going on in Syria is that there are sympathetic, Egypt-oriented demonstrations going on around Syria and on Facebook and other social media. They are being shut down pretty quickly by the government, and they are not developing to any kind of critical size or mass as yet. But there are, organizations that are calling for things probably next week. I think the situation in Syria, in some ways, is more stable than elsewhere. I think Syrians look at Egypt and they see in their own government a government and a secret police force that probably will not hesitate to shut these things down very, very quickly and quite ruthlessly. Okay, so that's one aspect of the stability in Syria. I think other aspects are that to a certain extent, Syria has already had its moment of transition, albeit from a father to a son. And that son has instituted modest political and economic reforms. So to a certain extent, you're not dealing with the same 30-year individual. You're dealing more with a dynasty, and a dynasty that shows a little bit of change. And you don't have what I think is one of the critical factors undermining the Mubarak government. With the Syrian government, for all its ills and evils, you don't have a government that has the perception that it is the servant of the United States. So this, whatever impetus is given against the Mubarak government because it is seen to be serving the interests of other foreign parties, you don't have that in the Syrian case. So we expect to see little bursts of action, but not necessarily anything destabilizing.
Just an explanation for the question. I'm a big fan of dialectics, especially as far as the social movements are concerned, and just a social problem that I see arising from all this change is that as far as the police are an instrument of the state for oppression, and that the police then use their power to engage in corrupt activities and kleptocracies and plutocracies, when movements like this tend to overthrow the regime and tend to sack all these people who are in the police, the people are still there. You can't arrest the entire police force or their social networks or their support in the old regime. You can't arrest everyone in the old regime. But anyway, do you see this? Historically, these things tend to lead to the old guard sort of falling into illegal activities, organized crime. That sort of seems to have gone. Okay, it's back now. But do you see this happening again? And if so, how can this sort of thing be combated? How can these new movements sort of combat increasing corruption by making sure that the old guard don't sort of go back into the hidey holes and become.
Anybody want to take that one on? I think one thing that we've learned is that de-Baathification in Iraq didn't work out very well. And I think people who are longtime observers of the Middle East, we haven't talked about Iraq very much, but I think one of the things that policymakers in the Middle East and outside the Middle East have learned is that de-Baathification was not a great success. So I think probably that's one of the things that people are thinking about. It's very hard to see how it will go until things fall one way or another, I think. Okay? We've got women back there.
I just want to know, what do you guys think would be the difference if Mubarak would leave right now versus in the next presidential election? And also, I wanted to know if you guys think anyone is ready to lead Egypt if he leaves right now.
Adel and then Dina.
The first part of the question, okay. If Mubarak would leave right now, are you asking who can lead the country?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. We have so many good people, intellectuals, very well versed in world politics, like Amr Musa, like al-Baradei, and like others, like you might not know the name, Kamal Abdel Majd. We have so many people who are capable of doing this. But the most important thing is for Mubarak to step down. And this is basically the demand of the demonstrators, and they will not give up until he steps down. And yesterday, I think, or this morning, he actually said that he's fed up with being the president of Egypt for that long, and he would like to retire. So this is an indication to what might take place in the next few days. Especially the demonstrators are determined and they are persistent and they are increasing in number every day, and some political parties and the opposition are joining them. Even Amr Musa himself went down today to Tahrir Square and to talk to these people about this. So the claim that Mubarak said that if he steps down then the country will collapse, that's a farce. It is really now collapsing because he's still in power. Once he steps down, then they establish something called the Majlis al-Hukama, a council of wise people, the intellectual people, including, for example, led by I'm getting senile, guys. No. Zuhail, Ahmed Zuhail, who called for the establishment of this council. So I have no doubt once he steps down, then things will be moving. It's no problem about it, I think.
We've got questions back here, but no microphone.
Leila, can I just say
Let Dina say something, then you can use the microphone and circulate it up.
just
Dina, go
something in
ahead.
response to your question. I think it's amazing how the Egyptian people have been actually able to establish that they don't need a government. They created these popular protection committees to protect themselves, and they have succeeded to a very large extent. Also, your second question about people leaving, just a few days after all hell broke loose, there were tons of at least four airplanes that full of people, the cronies, leaving the country, and there were even people arrested in Dubai with money in bags. So yeah, they're afraid.
All right, we'll have that question and back.
I just have a question. So you guys, we're talking about either democracy or dictatorship. So any betting man or woman, what's gonna happen?
Oh,
I didn't get any answer.
well, you want the answer? Oh, democracy, of course. Back in the back. Oh, go ahead. All right.
I don't know. I think my reading of the situation, and I'm a biased North Africanist. I think the best, I see Tunisia being a successful example. I really do. Because you have a high rate of literacy, you have a political organization, you have strong unions, and you have strong intellectuals. I think that's my readings of it. I don't know about Egypt, but I definitely see Tunisia being a successful example. I don't see that in Morocco. If things go bad in Morocco or Libya or Algeria, I think it's going to be worse. But I see Tunisia a successful example.
gentleman in the back.
I don't need a mic, I'm really
Okay, all right.
revolution fever seems to be spreading throughout the Middle East. So we have Tunisia, soon Egypt, hopefully, and then you have the Palestinian issue in Iraq, destabilized. If it continues in Morocco or Yemen or Algeria, that's just more countries destabilizing the entire region. So if that happens, and you have a region with 3, 4, 5 countries that are destabilized, what does that mean for economic development, U.S. relations with the Arab world, Israeli relations with the Arab world, and just the short-term 10 to 20 years, what's going to happen?
Again, in 15 seconds or less, yes. Go ahead. Go
I
for
think
it.
a lot of what we are. So a lot of, I think, what we're hearing and talking about in terms of the region, a lot of it does end up going back to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and sort of Arab-Israeli relations. And I think it once again points to the centrality of a need to find a peaceful solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. A lot of what we've seen in terms of destabilization, if you want to call it that, and certainly pro-democracy movements, I think the contrast that Dr. Hudson just pointed out a few minutes ago about Syria being a little bit of a different case because the regime isn't seen as being in the pockets of the Americans or the Israelis or any other foreign power, is an important factor, and I think it once again points to really the need to redouble the international efforts and have a way to reach a genuine, peaceful, and just solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think it will end up in the long term adding a lot of stability, whether it's economic stability in terms of trade, whether it's political stability in terms of treaties, and I think it will also neutralize more radical elements in the region, whether they're religious or secular in orientation. Because a lot of the tensions that people are worried about developing in the Middle East and the Arab world relate to, or really boil down to the lack of justice for the Palestinians. And once that is achieved, I think a lot of the other problems will be a lot easier to solve.